Shalom, a good day. Welcome to the Chai Academy. Happy to have you with us as we embark on a new class today, and you are able to see literally hundreds of other classes at thechaycenter.com/academy. So today's title is basically learning from God on how to have a relationship. Our last class was about the pros and cons of marriage, etc. But marriage is just a micro of the macro. Relationships would be the broader sense, and marriage would be one component, albeit an important and difficult component. Hey, Eileen, good afternoon. So there's a fascinating discussion in the Kabbalah and in the Torah about God creating the world, which teaches us lessons on how, right? Why did God create the world? Hey, Susan, why did God create the world? Because it was all about relationships. So we learn from God about what He did, what us as mere mortals should do to make all our relationships a little bit easier. So, the Kabbalah tells us, in the beginning, there was just God. There was just infinite energy, an infinite light, as the Kabbalah calls it. An infinite light. And it had no end. There was nothing but the light. Then God withdrew. God condensed Himself, withdrew into His essence, and created a void. As it says, and there was a void, right? The second chord of the Torah, there was a void. Then the Kabbalah tells us that God reintroduced Himself into the void. But the void wasn't like it was before, only godliness. There were foreign objects called receptacles. And through these receptacles, the energy was placed in the receptacles, in the vessels, so to speak, and the world was created. So I know it's very esoteric and very ethereal, but if we break it down, I think we can learn from basically life's lessons. So the first thing God did, it was the world, the universe, the galaxy, the everything and anything was full of God, full of His energy. The problem with that is that there was no room for anything else. Just God. As far as the eye could see, as far as there was only God, there was nothing. There was no space for any other existence. Not humans, not plants, not weeds, not sand, nothing. So what did God have to do? He had to withdraw Himself and create a void. This is the first unbelievable, powerful lesson, is that when we are wrapped up in ourselves, when we only think of ourselves, where the universe revolves around us, where everything is our way or the highway, we don't have space for somebody else. We don't have space for a spouse. We don't have space for a partner. We don't have space for children. It's all about us. I know plenty of people who their parents, for crying out loud, and their children are not adults, and they're forever going on vacation and leaving the kids behind. So you can do that once, I get it. You can do that twice, I get it. But forever leaving the kids behind, it seems that the kids are a disturbance to your existence. Now, the kids are not supposed to disturb your existence. Kids are supposed to enhance your existence. Granted, there's blips in the road, and it ain't easy being a parent. Likewise, a spouse. Likewise, a partner. Likewise, a friend. If it's all about you all the time, you'll never ever be able to have a relationship with anybody. So the first thing you have to do, the first thing one has to do, is basically withdraw from yourself. Create a void. Let somebody in. Allow them to come in to your space. And you do that by minimizing somewhat of yourself and allowing someone in. It's a very powerful concept. When a young couple, when they date, I always tell the young couple that, what did you see in the other person? And I listen very carefully. If the person says, well, I see that this person, she will make me happy, she will fulfill me, she will complete me, there's really no room for her. He didn't say she's amazing. It was all about, and that makes for a bad marriage, because it's all about the I, and the I is good. It's important. It's the id, but it can't only be about the I. So the first thing one has to do is one has to minimize themselves, make space for somebody else. I think I mentioned this in in a previous class, and this is the reason, by the way, this is the argument to get married younger. When you're younger, you haven't fulfilled all your space. As opposed to when you're older, you're in your mid-30s, everything is set. Your bar is exactly where you want it, the TV is exactly where you want it, the decor is exactly how you want it, and then somebody else comes in and rocks your boat. When you're younger, you haven't fully established yourself, you're not full of yourself, you could be molded. When you're older, it's a little bit harder. So when you're younger, it's a startup company. When you're older, it's a full-fledged merger. So that's the first thing. Withdraw, make space for somebody else. But we learned from God, it wasn't enough just withdraw. The problem with withdrawing is there's a risk that you don't come back. You make space for somebody else, but then you become a half a person. All the marrow of life has been sucked out, because you were an independent person and you run amok, happy, go lucky, etc., etc. And here you've been asked to make space for someone else, and that cramps your style, and so therefore you become a different person. The idea is not to become different. The idea is not to become morose. The idea is not to become sullen or sulk, right? But rather, like God did, He gave light back. He withdrew. He made the space. After He made the space for someone else, for the world to be created, He came back. He came back. And His energy and His light and His happiness and His joy and everything all meshed together, right? And it became a perfect union, right? So that's the idea. You make space for someone else, but not begrudgingly. You make space for someone else, and you'll enrich your life that way. Right? If a person who's alone, a person lives alone, and a person just likes to dance to his own tune, chances are will die alone, because they won't allow anybody else to enter, and if they do, they just, no, I prefer to be alone. I prefer to be alone. So that's what God did. God withdrew. He allowed someone in. He allowed us all in. And then He shed His love and His light and His energy and etc. on us, and it was a perfect union. And that's how we should be. So, for example, you're married, right? You feel that it's become too much of you. You withdraw. Give space for someone else. Let them have an opinion. Let them share their thoughts. It's not all about you, and then enjoy the process. Also, the other thing about coming back is that it's very important to be present. It says clearly in the Torah that God's presence, Einei Hashem Elakecha Tamid, God is present consistently. Right? God is not like a politician who, as he's shaking your hand, is looking to the next person. Nice to see you again. Right? God is completely present. And in order to have a happy relationship, is you need to be present. You need to be completely present. In Kabbalah, by the way, there's a term called pnimi. Pnimi means that you focus on where you're at. So I guess pnimi is what they call mindfulness. What you are right now, you're present in the moment. You know exactly what's going on. You're not thinking about a dozen things. You're a pnimi. You're talking to your kids, you're talking to your kids. You're talking to your partner, you're talking to your partner. You're talking to your spouse, talking to your spouse. You're doing this, you're at work, you're completely focused the way you ought to be and not thinking about a dozen other things. Doesn't mean when the phone rings, you have to deal with a problem, you pick it up. But you while you're talking with your kids, you're not thinking about work. And while you're talking to your spouse, you're not thinking about the golf game. So that's also when God withdrew and he came back, God showed that the secret is to come back. To come back and be present and be involved. You know, there's different ways of a relationship, right? There's we know this from parenting. There's authoritarian. It's not good. Where it's your way or the highway. There's passive. Whatever goes. I think it's better than authoritarian, but it's not ideal. Then there's absent, where you're really not present. Then you're just an absent spouse, absent parent, absent colleague, absent friend, right? And then the best one is authoritative. I'm sorry, tongue twister. Is where you're involved and you have an opinion, and you're not. It's not has to be your way. It's authoritarian. But you offer. You're not absent. You're not passive. You offer of yourself, and that's the best way. That's the best way to be. So you come back. The light comes back. You come back into the person's life. You show exactly. You show that you're present. Now, when God came back, he came back not to light. Remember, he was light. He withdrew. When he came back to vessels. Vessels, think of a cup, it's limited. It can only, an 8-ounce cup can all hold 8 ounces of water. A 9-ounce cup is 9 ounces of water, etc., etc. Here, God is infinite. The cup, the vessel, is finite. And God was okay with it. So, God came back to the other. It wasn't the same. Right? They say, differences, opposites attract, etc. Maybe some truth to that. But the idea is that you are not marrying a clone of you. It's not the way it works. Your children are not a clone of you. One's friends, one's peers, one's mentors are not you. They're just not. They're just not. You resonate, but you have to resonate with people who are not like you, and the greater the person, the greater the openness of the person, is they can resonate with different types of people. Right? There are some people who can only tolerate a certain kind. It's not good. when God came back to these vessels were all different. Every single vessel served a different purpose, filled God's light. It filled with God's light, and it ran with it and created something, made something of itself. And you have children. They're all different. They're all different vessels, and each one runs with it. Runs with the light and the energy and the love and the support from yourself, and runs with it. They cannot be like you, right? They could be similar in some aspects, of course. They could be exactly like you in one aspect, of course, but because they are their own mensch, they're not going to be like you. And we see this clearly, is that God, right? He and it's brought down in Kabbalah that the same energy God gives to humans, He gives to a blade of grass. The same concentration, the same focus. The difference is on the recipient, how we receive it. So we absorb more of God's energy than a blade of grass does. Sometimes. But it's we have to be able to deal with each individual persons, people, relationships in our lives, even though they're all different, and not one answer fits all. And it's a fascinating thing in Jewish law, a fascinating thing. And I don't know if you have this anywhere else, but in Jewish law, someone comes to the rabbi and says to the rabbi, "Rabbi, do I have to fast on Yom Kippur?" And the rabbi says, "Of course." Someone else comes to the rabbi, says to the rabbi, "Rabbi, do I have to fast on Yom Kippur? I suffer in the past, recent past, from anorexia." So the first answer to the person was, of course you have to. It's a biblical command. You have to. There's no what. The second person, also a human being, the rabbi says, "No, you can't fast." A third person can come. I'm using this as a benign example. And do I have to fast on Yom Kippur? And the rabbi would say, half a day. Half a day. And then check your insulin. See how it goes. Right? So, there's not, and you find this in all of Judaism, there is no one answer. There's a basic, there's a core. But then there's beyond the core. And so in relationships, the same is true. There is a core relationship, a connection. But the connection is so that the ability to connect. However, the connection is different for each and every person. If you treat a friend, your relationship with a friend is the same relationship you have with your spouse, you're off. If you have a relationship with your spouse, a collegiate relationship with your spouse, you're off. A person has to know how to adapt. A person has to know when to hold them, when to fold them, when to say this, when to do this, with whom, how, at any given moment. Right? Think of a therapist. Therapist sits and hears different problems and answers accordingly. It's not one question that's asked. It's not one thought that's needed, but rather it's potpourri of different ideas. And that's how relationships are. So, can't be full of yourself. You have to let the other person in. And that's true, by the way, of a relationship with God. If it's all about you, if it's all about the ego, and the only thing that matters is you, God can never enter. There's no space. If it's all about you, and you love yourself so much, there's no space for a spouse. Right? If you're the wisest and sharpest person with the highest IQ and the most organized person in the world, work for yourself. Don't hire anybody. The relationships are to complement. So first thing you do, once again, is withdraw. You make space for somebody else. You made space for someone else. Make sure that you don't hide behind a rock, and you come out and you have a relationship with them. And realize they're not you, they're other. They're not you, they're other. And it's a completely different relationship, and you have to have your wits about you. For some people, by the way, it comes naturally. For others, it doesn't. And it's an acquired. You got to work at it, to how to be able to switch off and switch on at different times. So those are the keys. Now, the Kabbalah takes it one more step, though. The Kabbalah says that it didn't fully work. It was tohu. The first, God's first attempt was God's first attempt actually didn't fully work, and so he tried again. So the first time he tried is called tohu. The second time is called tikkun, correction. You ever heard of tikkun olam? That's where it comes from, which is the lesson for us, that we also have to know how to adjust if it's not working. What if this relationship is not working? It used to work, and you do exactly the same thing, and it now doesn't work. So now you have to, the exercise is, you have to withdraw, contemplate, right? Take out the subjectivity, come back, connect, and try again. And that's part and parcel of a relationship. In fact, think about it. When a person gets married, they're infused with a new spouse, they're infatuated, and the relationship is hot and heavy and passionate and right, and it's just, there's this physical chemistry and sexual energy, but it changes, and you change with it. If you don't, you're sunk. And God taught us that. Created the world, it was all hunky-dory, and then it didn't fully work. So God said, I need tikkun. I need to correct this and change the mindset, change how I act, what I do. You know, I don't know who said it, but the definition of insanity is doing exactly the same thing and expecting different results. So you got to change. It's not working. Change up. Right? And then see how it goes. If that's not working, change it again, etc. You know, the talking about connecting with others who are not necessarily on your wavelength or very different than you, etc. And I've told you this before in the Chai Academy. There's somebody approached the Rebbe and says to the Rebbe, I don't understand. I have a child that's really, dysfunctional, a rebel, and a loudmouth, and a brute, and a thug, and I don't understand. I brought up all my kids the same. Why is this one so different? And the Rebbe told her, you can't bring them up the same. It's a recipe for disaster. Every child is different. And you bring up exactly the same, it may be good for some, and it's not necessarily good for others. This is, by the way, one of the problems. I'm not sure how it is now, but one of the problems when I was in school, in yeshiva, and we're talking about elementary school, high school, and even with my kids, it was almost like one size fits all. So it appealed to 20% of the class, and the other 80% floundered. Some made it, some really floundered and got hurt. A good teacher knows how to connect on different levels. A good parent knows how to connect on different levels. And then the Mishnah says, "Siyag l'chachma shtika." Sometimes the best answer to a lot of relationship issues is shut your mouth. You don't have to have the last word. Hear what they say, absorb, accept, even if you disagree. And that's from the Mishnah. And then you just move on. I hope you enjoyed this class. If you did, please share it along with others, and and check back again for the next Chai Academy. God bless, be well, and shalom.